Hello, I'm Esme Murphy with CBS News Minnesota. Last night was a pivotal one in the Minnesota governor's race. Republicans chose Dr. Scott Jensen as their nominee. Earlier today, I spoke with Democratic strategist Abou Amara and Republican strategist and former Senate Majority Leader Amy Koch about this selection and what it means for the 2022 elections. Take a look. So joining us right now, former Senator Amy Koch, Republican strategist, and Democratic strategist Abou Amara. Got to ask you, Senator Koch, you were there. Wild convention. Is Scott Jensen the candidate who can finally win a statewide race for Republicans? They haven't won since 2006.
Oh, right. It has been a very long time. And so I wasn't there. I was following super closely. I had all my intel people on the ground. So thank you to them. But I was riveted yesterday. A lot of, turn of fortune and all of that. But yes, I think that it's still looking like a good year for Republicans. I think that a decision on Roe v. Wade in June is going to play a part. And we're going to kind of see how that plays out. But the other thing about Dr. Jensen, he's got some name ID because he came out so strongly and had such a strong platform in the pandemic. And frankly, the Democrats have been paying attention to him. In the past, the last two cycles, we've had Jeff Johnson, really nice guy, but one super generic name, very calm, sort of not known. But it's pretty hard to ignore Dr. Jensen, and I don't think the DFL will be able to.
Well, I was just sharing the story with 2012. I was at the state fair, and a young man was walking behind Jeff Johnson, the two-time nominee for governor, with a sign pointing to him saying, "This is Jeff Johnson, the Republican nominee." I don't think Scott Jensen is going to need that. And I actually told him that. But let's break down some of what you said, Senator. Let's talk about the abortion issue. I just interviewed Scott Jensen, and he has said repeatedly that he is against all abortions with the exception if a mother's life is in danger, and he does not have an exception for incest or rape. Abou Amara, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and to the point you made earlier, Scott Jensen has a lot of name ID. The issue is going to be they're going to know exactly what he stands for, and that's an example of it. That's an extreme position and out of step with the suburban voters that may be driving a large part of this election. And I think it's really going to make this election more akin to 2010, where there may have been some Democratic losses at the national level, but at the state level, we were able to win the governor's race, the attorney general race, the secretary of state race, all the constitutional offices, because Scott Jensen fundamentally is out of step with Minnesota voters.
Do you think so? You think the abortion issue will play for the Democrats in the governor's race?
Without a doubt. Coming into this election, we felt there might have been a turnout problem, a base issue with certain key parts of the Democratic coalition, people of color, African Americans, and women in particular. And because of the Supreme Court's decision, which we think will come down in June or July, that's going to activate and mobilize that group of women in the suburbs, but all across Minnesota. And then we get to show that Scott Jensen is a continuation of it. He is the manifestation of it, a doctor who says if you are raped, you have to carry that baby to term.
What about that, Senator Koch? I mean, Roe v. Wade's been on the books for 50 years, almost 50 years. Is this really an issue, if it is in fact overturned, that it's going to rally Republican women and Republican voters to the Republican candidates?
Right. So a couple things there. I do agree with Abou. I think that the Democrats, their base is now going to be excited. And they were not going to be coming out.
Right.
The base has not been excited. It's kind of what the Democrats have. I also think it can work for the Republicans. And I'm not going to speak for Senator and Dr. Jensen on that issue. But what I will say is yesterday at the convention, it's funny, the DFL is painting him as an extremist, but I will tell you that on the convention floor, whether it came to on several issues, including some big ones like 2A issues, gun rights, the former senator was explaining some of his voting record because when he was in the Senate, he had some fairly moderate views on that. And so I think that I get, that this is the playbook that the DFL have when it comes to any Republican candidate. But there are a lot of nuances to this candidate, and I think they're going to be a little harder to pigeonhole him.
Well, let's talk about his gun rights position. He apologized to the delegates last night. On Saturday night, saying he was sorry that he was on the wrong side of the issue back in 2017 when he was a co-author of legislation that would have expanded background checks, universal background checks, and another major bill. Now he has flipped. I mean, doesn't that look like an opportunistic move here on an issue that people are fairly entrenched? He switched his mind 180 in 4 years. Even his other Republicans have said he was opportunistic in order to win the nomination. Abou?
The short answer is yes. I mean, he's trying to play both sides of the issue. I think it speaks to two things. First, it shows you how extreme the Republican Party has become on common sense gun safety. You can support the Second Amendment and also support maybe we shouldn't have weapons of war in the street. And he apologized the same day that there was a mass shooting in Buffalo where people lost their lives. The idea that you're going to say, we are just going to have unfettered access to guns all the time, no matter what, the day of a mass shooting is just out of step with Minnesota voters. Again, it's another issue that shows how extreme, not just Scott Jensen, but the Republican Party of Minnesota has become.
Senator Koch, we're talking about Scott Jensen now because obviously he was just nominated, but to a certain extent, any election is about the incumbent. We should all be focusing on Tim Walz and whether he's doing a good job or a bad job. Do you think people, though, will be focusing on Scott Jensen throughout this?
No, they're not going to be. I understand the DFL want that. Governor Walz is going to want to try to do that. But the fact are, that's not what people are talking about right now. Is paying $5 at the gas station. People are talking about no baby formula on the shelves. People are talking about shortages. People are talking about employers are talking about not being able to find people to work, and so people are closed. People aren't able to staff. People are talking about public safety. People are talking about Minneapolis that was burning to the ground. I understand that the DFL are going to want to make this about Scott Jensen, and they should. That's politically what they need to do. But the facts are that is not, when you go out and talk to Minnesotans, these are the things they're talking about. And that's why Democrats are in trouble. And until they start to get their head around that these are the issues that people are worried about, that Minnesotans are concerned about, that they saw their kids for 2 years not being able to be in school, not being able to play sports, still in some areas having to wear masks, and the anxiety and the depression and the loss of learning that happened. Until Democrats start addressing those issues, the election is going to be about those things, whether they want it to be or not.
Abou Amara, I've got to agree with Senator Koch. I mean, people are just horrified by inflation, and they also are just horrified by the status of their children. They have no idea how far behind their kids are. They sense they are behind. They're seeing behavioral problems. Isn't that all going to help Dr. Scott Jensen?
There's no question there are structural issues going into the midterms that are difficult for Democrats, right? I'm not going to dispute that. What is different, though, is that elections are about choices. Do not compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And people are going to have to decide, do I want a governor who says if I'm raped, I have to carry that baby to term? Do people want a governor who is a doctor who's actively telling people not to take the COVID-19 vaccine so we could get this pandemic behind us? There are things that Governor Walz has done great. There are areas maybe he could do a bit better. That's like every human being. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a choice election. And we believe that contrast is going to be clear for Minnesotans.
Let's talk about education, because I think Senator Koch was spot on that people are very worried about their kids. Are they going to look at the education proposals from the Republicans at the legislature for $30 million of spending, and then they're going to look at Governor Walz's $1 billion that calls for all kinds of interventions, it has counselors in it, all kinds of things like that, and say, we want to go with the Democrats? And Tim Walz was a former teacher. I mean, he makes a good case for being the education candidate.
Right, except for when kids haven't been in school for 2 years. I think
Or
that's
will
gonna
they blame him for their kids not being in school for 2 years?
That's what I'm saying. And also additionally, this is not a budget year. Last year was a budget year. They spent $650 million in education. So this will be additional supplemental money. And by the way, this Republicans have a good chunk of money and a bill that's moving on its own about mental health issues in a variety of areas. So I think that I just think that these issues, whether it's education, whether it's public safety, whether it's the economy in a very big way, are going to be strong headwinds against the DFL. And so they're gonna talk about other things. I understand that. They're gonna try to change the subject. They're gonna try to use the extremist playbook. But ultimately, I love, what did you say? I'm not the almighty, I'm the alternative. I just don't think that's going to be acceptable to folks anymore. I think that they're going to want to see some action on some really difficult issues they've been facing.
And Abou, I think people really are angry about the schools being closed for 2 years. They kind of tried to muddle through it. I don't know how parents did it. I don't know how parents of young children did it. Teaching, trying to work, trying to do all these things. Is Walz going to get the blame for that? Because I think a lot of people do blame him. Or will people be looking ahead at what might be done with his budget when it comes to education?
Yeah, I think two things, right? So people are feeling that pressure, that anxiety that you talked about. But as we get farther and farther away from it and closer to the election, Tim Walz actually gets to sell a mission accomplished message. He gets to say to the people of Minnesota, thank you for helping us get through this pandemic. I know it was hard. We've got it behind us. We are moving forward. Minnesota is back. He gets to sell that story in the fall because now kids are going to be going to summer camp. Kids are going to be going to school in the fall. The context in which all of that pain is in, and it's real, and I want to acknowledge it, we're going to be in a fundamentally different place in the fall, and that's the success story that Tim Walz gets to sell.
How about locking Steve Simon in jail? Dr. Jensen has said a couple of times, again last night, again Saturday night, that he thinks that Secretary of State Steve Simon should be in jail because of election irregularities. What evidence is there that he presided or enabled any election irregularities, Amy Koch?
Right. And that's the kind of rhetoric that you hear at conventions. It's not, I personally don't adhere to that. And I think that a lot of people recognize that this election was held in 2020 and we have a new president and it was done in a good way. I don't have any problem with Republicans, and they should be talking about, because the idea of there's sort of like two sides, right? It's the lock them up, which I don't agree with. And then it's nothing's ever wrong with elections. They're all, everything's fair, and from the DFL side that I hear. I think that having an eye on integrity is just as important as making sure that there's access. What I would say is everybody to the polls, but making sure that every vote counts because everyone is voting legally.
But doesn't that sound wacky, Abou?
It's not just wacky, it's dangerous. We literally have a threat against the country. You've seen foreign entities try to influence our elections and undermine legitimacy of our elections. The entire American experiment is based on the idea that we have faith in us as people to make decisions. And if you undermine that, you undermine the very essence of America. His words are dangerous. Steve Simon, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter who it is. If you have evidence, come forward with the evidence. But if you do not, you cannot use that as an argument. And what's even scarier is that it wasn't just him saying it was the raucous applause that he got from hundreds of delegates who also believe that, who represent a critical part of the Republican Party in Minnesota. That is a threat to our republic.
What about the Republicans who have been Republicans for the past 2 years? Some of them, not all of them, have been complaining about the 2020 election irregularities with voting machines. And what do the Republicans decide to vote with? Something that looks like a Nintendo set at the convention yesterday. I mean, is that a little bit hypocritical there?
Well, that's why. Here's what I think. I think that there is. Everybody wants to. If the DFL or the Republicans had every moment held to them, what happens at a convention, well, I don't know why anybody would join either party. Sometimes it is a convention and get raucous. But ultimately, in the end, there was a move actually to go to paper ballots based on this idea, and Republicans went with electronic voting.
Nintendos.
Because it made sense. It was easy. It was easier to vote, and so sort of that sentiment prevailed. And I think that actually goes to show that that's where most Republicans are.
Right. Abou,
they voted electronically.
You want to tackle that one?
Well, what they do in the Republican Party, I'll let them handle. At the end of the day, our elections are safe, they're secure. Minnesota is historically known as one of the best voter states in the country. That's going to continue to be the case regardless of what the Republicans do.
Let's talk about COVID, because that obviously is one of the biggest issues here, if not the biggest issue, and how Governor Walz handled it. And we've already covered this a little bit. But what about Dr. Jensen essentially being a COVID denier or a vaccine denier? He has specifically said he disagrees with CDC findings that if you have had COVID, you should still get vaccinated. He joined a federal lawsuit to stop kids from being vaccinated. Is this a mainstream view that Republicans share? I know everyone is upset about the lockdowns, but what about the medical science? Isn't he an outlier here?
Well, this is sort of interesting because where I would go with this is when people would ask me about, like, they actually ask political people about medical stuff, and I just go, do not ask me. You know where you need to go? Go to see your doctor. What are you talking to me about this? I don't know. I'm going to go see my doctor. I mean, in this case, he is a doctor. And so he gets to have his medical opinions on these things. And they differed a little bit from the CDC, which I would guess that you could find many doctors that differed from the CDC. And I think that as the discussions go on about the pandemic, and this is not to blame anyone, right? We didn't know what was happening in the beginning. Like, there was the lockdown for the first couple of weeks. Nobody knew what was going on. I didn't know if we went outside, if it was going to be a zombie apocalypse. And I think most people were wondering about that. And so I think that there's a grace period for Governor Walz on that. I really do. But as things come out, and as more and more, so now the vaccines work to keep you out of the hospital, but they didn't stop you from getting it. And they've made that very clear. Now they don't work for Omicron, so you have to, boosters. It's a moving target. And I think what he was saying as a doctor is, like, talk to your doctor. Don't just blindly go into this or read something on the internet. I think if like going to your physician, and how this ever became political in my mind, I guess it's just both sides did this, right? And it's a shame. And I
want to hear from you, Abou, on this, but I do want to say, and I think in fairness to Dr. Jensen, he really is a family doctor, a practicing doctor. I've been to his office down in Chaska. He has a huge family practice that has been successful for many years. But what about this issue with COVID? I mean, Senator Koch just offered that explanation. What do you think of that, Abou?
Well, I think that's a bit of wishful thinking. I think at the end of the day, when you're a family doctor who is successful as he has been clearly with his practice, you have a duty, you have an ethical obligation to speak what is not just in your opinion true, but what has been deemed objectively true by the scientific community. And the scientific community overwhelmingly has said vaccines work. And if you are then going to run for office and say that there are large circumstances where people should not take vaccines, that is undermining public health in this state. And you have no business trying to lead that same state. We have a doctor actively saying, don't listen to doctors. I mean, that's the essence of what's happening here. And that's not something we can have in the governor's office.
In 2018, I interviewed Governor Tim Pawlenty, of course, who challenged the nominating process, went right to the primary. And I was interviewing him here in the studio, and he said to me, Jeff Johnson is not going to be able to beat Tim Walz. Tim Walz is just too good a campaigner. He's raised the money. Is this a deja vu situation where there is concern that Scott Jensen will not be able to beat Tim Walz, who by any standard is a pretty savvy, tough politician and a good campaigner? So
here's a couple things. The Jensen party, the group is celebrating today, and they should. That was a slog yesterday. 9 ballots. I think that there were mistakes made, and oftentimes people become victims of their own like victory, right? Because they think that, oh, well, I won, so I must have done everything right. You didn't. The mayor of Lexington played a large role in the change of fortune because Kendall Qualls was winning on this. And I also think that running a state convention with 2,200 stalwart Republicans is an entirely different deal than running with millions of Minnesotans going to the polls. And this governor has raised over $5 million now. He's got a war chest.
A lot.
He's got ID. And he has this kind of one Minnesota motto. His campaign machine has been running for 4 years. So to come in with like, well, we won Republican convention, we're going to victory. That's not what that would be foolish. And so this is my message to Republicans. Don't take this lightly. Don't even begin to think that this was not the end of the road. This is just a beginning. And Governor Walz is going to be a tough candidate to beat. And we have not won statewide since 2006. So, and there are reasons for that. So,
all right, we'll have to see. Abou.
Yeah, I think they've doubled down on a losing strategy. I think they've decided we're just going to continue to activate a smaller and smaller and smaller part of the electorate and make sure that there's a purity test for those folks. Mind you, they're losing tons of voters in the suburbs. They're literally, the population is starting to shrink in some of their bases in greater Minnesota. And at the same time, the growing areas in Minnesota have turned progressively more blue. People forget Tim Pawlenty represented Eagan, and then he became governor. Eagan is now a solidly Democratic seat. That's just a microcosm of what is happening because the Republicans are chasing an electorate of the past.
All right. Well, listen, Abou Amara, Amy Koch, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to check in with both of you throughout this campaign season. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Esme.
Keep watching CBS News Minnesota for continuing coverage.